Hi folks, and welcome back to Fishing with Den. Today I thought we'd talk about wagglers, and specifically what wagglers you need to use when you're fishing in a lake or a pond like I'm doing today. And really there's only one golden rule, and that is your float must be in control of the conditions. By that what I mean is it's not being pulled out of position or it's not too heavy for the conditions. But before we get into it in any real detail, let me just explain to you the different types of floats. And most of you probably already know this, but if I put these ones down, I tend to make my own floats, but a float is a float is a float. And these are straight wagglers. You can buy them in the tackle shops, and yeah, I've done that in the past, but mostly these days I make mine with interchangeable tips. All it means is I don't have to buy a different set with different thicknesses of tip, and so on and so forth. But the principle is the same. So basically, these are straight wagglers. And as you can see, down at the smaller end, they have a fairly thin cane insert. And that can go all the way up through to these ones here. I mean, this one is probably something like 2 BB, and the biggest one I carry is about 3.5 AA, which is about 2.4 grams. But you'll notice that you can have these fairly thin tips in it, or as you go further up the range, you can use these thicker tips. Now bear in mind, of course, that you're only going to be casting a very short distance with this, so the thin tip, first of all, it's going to be sensitive, but secondly, you're only going to be a rod or two lengths out, so you'll be able to see it. Again, as you go up, it may well be that you stay with these tips, and you may have a longer tip or antenna in the thing, or certainly once you get out to this size of float, this one's 3.5 AA, which is basically 3 grams. I've got the thicker tip in here, and it just means I can see it, but also it means I can change it to a different colour to suit the light conditions. Going up the range, I have these bodied wagglers, and these have got loading in the bottom. By the way, these straight ones can also have loading in the bottom or not, and I'll cover that in a second, whether to go for ones with loading or whether to go for the ones with no loading in the base here. But these body wagglers have a loading in the base, and if I choose the bigger one, you can see that that's actually got a large amount of lead loading in the base. And the idea is that it fires just like a dart, and it casts a long way, and for that reason you're going to need the thicker tips on these. And again, because they're heavier, they will, as I say, go a long way, but they also work better in the sort of more windy conditions. So let's now go into a little bit more detail on when to use what, and how do you know what to use? Well, as I said, you've got to be in control of the situation with your float. You can't have the water, if it's a bit windy, just blowing your float around all over the place. If it's moving everywhere, you're not going to get a bite, so what's the point? You really need to keep the float still or moving with the undertow. Now when I say undertow, for those of you that don't know what that is, if you've got a pond like this where you've got a wind travelling across the surface creating a ripple, when it gets to the end that curls under, and the underneath section actually goes in the opposite direction. So if your float's going with the wind, it's probably that your bait is going to be acting unnaturally. I have actually done a video on how to control the wind's effects, so I'll put a link up the top somewhere and one down in the description box for you, so you can have a look at that if you want to. But basically, to get that control, you have to take a few things into account. How far out you need to fish, how deep is it, what are the wind conditions like, and are there any other factors which you need to take into account. But those are the main ones anyway. So if we go back to these floats, as I say, if you're fishing literally one rod length out or down in the margins down here, something like that, 2 BB, perfectly acceptable with a thin cane insert. And then gradually, as you're going out further, you're just going up in size on the floats, and as we said before, you may well need to use the thicker insert, partly so you can see it, but secondly for more buoyancy. Now I've got a range of inserts, some of which are even thicker than this. That's for more extreme circumstances, but for the most part I'll have these straight wagglers in anything from 2 BB up to about 3.5 3.5 AA shot. and that copes with most of my normal conditions. If I've got to cast further, as I say, that's when I go to all of these bodied wagglers with the loading on the bottom. And as I said, loaded wagglers do cast like darts, so they do go a bit further than the unloaded wagglers. But with unloaded wagglers, if you put the shot around here, which say this is 3.5 AA, you'd have effectively three AA's worth of shot at the bottom and some dropper shots to finish off. And dropper shots are just shots which are down the line to enable you to control the drop. Again, I've done videos on all of this, so feel free to have a look through the site on that. The beauty of having unloaded floats is, yet they don't cast quite as far as a loaded float, but they don't actually go diving underwater so much. So if you're fishing a shallow lake, even if you've got to fish at distance, you might want to consider just using an unloaded float as opposed to a loaded float. Choice is up to you in the end, of course, because it's quite likely that you'll overcast and then sink the line and draw back into the baited area. Something else to bear in mind is, as you go up even further, this one is a 9-gram loaded float, which is 11 AAA, AAA shot, and that's quite an extreme float. And you'll also notice this one is a lot longer than the smaller ones. The reason for that is, especially in deeper waters, that undertow we were talking about and the surface drift, you may need a longer float to actually combat the surface drift and get your line down below it so you can actually control the float. And that's what it's all about. So, talking about conditions today, we've got a breeze pretty much coming at me, and I've plumbed the depth and I've got about 3 feet deep. I'll just put this down a second for you. Right, somewhere about 3 feet deep, I've got number 8, number 8, number 8, number 8, and then the bulk shot, the locking shot. Okay, again, I've done a video on how to set up a float, but really what I've done today, I've plumbed the depth and I've cast out to it's about 16 turns on the reel, which is, let's call it 16-18 meters by the time you add on the rod. But this is a 3 AA float, and that's probably about as far as I'd want to fish with this float. Now, if the wind gets up any more than it is now and it's blowing straight at me, it may well be that I need to change this float. So all I do is just unclip it from the swivel here, and then I can go to a somewhat heavier float. And it may well be at that point that I go to, I don't know, a 4 or 5 AA float in the bodied waggler design. So really that's all you need to know about wagglers for fishing on ponds. It's all very well me telling you about it, but in practice it really is going to take a little bit of experience before you get it right. But one final thing, and as someone actually pointed out the other day, he's seen people, when they're plumbing the depth, they put a plummet on the end of the hook here, they cast it out and they get it all set up, and then they find that the float doesn't actually go as far when they take the plummet off, so they have to change the float. So that's just another little quick tip, and for the guy that actually put that one in the comments, thank you very much for that. I'm now going to start doing some fishing, hopefully catch a few fish. Well, first bite, not bad. Good bite too, and that was on bread this time. Oh, it's taking line. Kiting over to the right to my mate's swim, but I won't tell him. Okay, he's out of the way and he's coming back in. dorsal fin. You can see that. There we go. Oh, at least he's not caught on the dorsal anymore. Just got on the net. Okay, so he's swallowed it. Nice little fish. Good start. Well, I've caught that first fish, but the light is now directly in front of where I wanted to fish, and it's making it struggle to be seen. And of course that's something which is beyond your control. So what I've done, because it's a pleasure day, I've just fed a swim down there, just to the right, so it's not in the eye line anymore. As the sun moves around, I'll go back. I'll keep feeding that swim just gently, but I'll probably have 1 or 2 fish down here with a bit of luck. And if I don't, that's okay, because it's still better than trying to look into direct sunshine. Second bite, just off to the right there. Only a small fish this time, but at least they're feeding. And I'm obviously in control, and you'll have noticed that down there I was actually fishing exactly the same float. So depth is pretty much the same, there's probably a couple of inches difference, but I could have probably used a smaller float fishing down there, but as I say, it's better to be heavier rather than lighter. Oops, there's the hook. There he is. Lovely. That'll do. Not only small though, this one. That'll do. Not big, but very welcome. Oh, swallowed it again. See if we can get this hook out. Open your mouth, fish. Open. Thank you. There we go. We're getting a lot of these small ones today. Still, all very welcome. It's coming in like a wet sack, this one. And again caught round his dorsal fin, look. Got a run going on by the look of it. Yeah. Going from right to left. Again, smallish fish. And this time at least he started to fight. Now this time at least he was hooked in the lip. And that's what you get when you weren't looking, because you were just getting your sandwiches out. Finally get a decent fish on and can't react in time. Still caught it in the end, eh? Like I always say, sometimes it's just better to be lucky than really good. And I definitely think sometimes I'm on the lucky end of things. Off to the left somewhere. There we go. Come on, fish. Yes, well, oh, it's caught in the cheek rather than in the face as well, or in the mouth rather. Nice one. So there you go then, folks. The Waggler rig's working well. I've been putting a few fish together, and so hopefully you can now see that what I've been telling you does make some sense. As I said, the cardinal rule is to make the float control the conditions. If you're a little bit too heavy for the conditions, that's not too bad, but if you're too light for the conditions, that's definitely not where you want to be. Anyway, that's it for another one. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, as we always say, click the button. If you want to subscribe, you can do that too. And until the next time, bye for now.